He thought the stain on his reputation was my blue uniform, so he tried to wipe me out of the conversation. He didn't realize that while he was climbing the ladder, I was the one deciding whether to burn the ladder down. There is a specific kind of invisibility that comes with the smell of industrial lemon cleaner. It is a chemical cloak. When you wear a blue tunic with a name tag that is slightly crooked, and you are pushing a yellow bucket on wheels, you cease to be a person in the eyes of the corporate world. You become infrastructure. You become a piece of furniture that occasionally moves. I learned this 3 months ago when I started cleaning the 14th floor of the Kinsley building. It was 8 p.m. on a Tuesday. The office was mostly empty, save for the hum of the servers and the rhythmic swish-swish of my mop against the polished marble of the lobby. Mark was still at his desk. I could see him through the glass walls of the conference room, pacing, gesturing, wilding at a whiteboard that contained sales projections for the third quarter. He looked sharp. His suit was tailored, his hair was perfectly gelled, and his posture screamed ambition. He didn't see me. He never saw me when I was in the blues, as the cleaning staff called them. I stopped near the door, wringing out the mop head. The dirty water trickled down into the bucket, a dark gray slurry. "We need to cut the overhead," Mark was saying into his headset, his voice projecting the kind of forced confidence that middle management thrives on. "I don't care about the service contracts. Get them terminated. If we want this merger to go through, the books need to look lean. Lean, Jerry. Ruthless." He turned, his eyes scanning the hallway. His gaze passed right over me. I wasn't Elena, the woman he had been dating for 6 months. I was just the cleaner. I lowered my head and continued down the hall. Later that night, when I returned to our shared apartment, the dynamic shifted. I had showered at the gym on the way home, scrubbing the scent of bleach from my skin and changing into a silk blouse and linen trousers. Mark was on the couch, loosening his tie. He looked exhausted. "Long day?" I asked, pouring 2 glasses of water. "Brutal," he sighed, taking the glass without looking at me. "The acquisition is heating up. The buyers are ghosting us on the due diligence, and the board is breathing down my neck. I have to secure this promotion, Elena. If I become VP of operations before the buyout, my stock options double." "I'm sure you'll get it," I said softly, sitting on the armchair opposite him. "You're very good at cutting costs." He finally looked at me, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "It's not just cutting costs. It's strategy. It's high-level optics. It's complicated." He took a sip of water, then frowned. "How was your day?" He hesitated on the word. He always did. "It was fine," I said. "Honest work." "Right." He set the glass down. "Look, Elena. About Friday night." I stiffened slightly. Friday was the annual gala for his company, Kinsley Logistics. It was the event of the season for his industry. "Yes? I need you to." He waved his hand vaguely in my direction. "Polish it up a bit. Director Reynolds is going to be there. And the rumors are that a representative from the buying group might make a quiet appearance. I need to look stable. Successful. Matched." "Matched?" I repeated. "You know what I mean. Just wear that black dress. The expensive one. And maybe don't mention the current job. My job as a cleaner." He flinched. "You don't have to say it like that. It's temporary. You're just finding yourself." It's a pause. "Just tell them you're consulting." "I am not a consultant, Mark. I clean the floors of the building you work in." "Exactly." He stood up, his voice rising just enough to show his stress. "And do you know how that looks? I am trying to become a vice president. I can't be the guy dating the help. It sounds medieval. It sounds messy." I looked at him. Really looked at him. I saw the fear behind the arrogance. He was terrified of being ordinary. He believed that status was a contagious disease, and he didn't want to catch my perceived poverty. "I won't lie, Mark," I said calmly. "Then just don't talk," he snapped. Then, realizing his tone, he softened it, walking over to place a hand on my shoulder. It felt heavy, patronizing. "Just be beautiful. Be my mystery. Let me do the talking. Please." "For us?" "For us," I echoed. I didn't tell him that I had already seen the guest list. I didn't tell him that the representative from the buying group he was so terrified of was already in the room with him every night. I didn't tell him that the only reason I was cleaning floors was because I needed to know if Kinsley Logistics was worth the $200 million my private equity firm was about to offer for it. Paperwork can lie. Spreadsheets can be massaged. But the trash cans? The conversations overheard by the invisible staff? The way managers treat the people they think don't matter? That is where the truth lives. And the truth I was finding was rot. Friday arrived with a cold rain that slicked the city streets. I dressed in silence. I didn't wear the black dress he asked for. Instead, I wore a midnight blue gown, structured and severe, with a high neck and an open back. It was tailored to within an inch of its life. I wore no jewelry except for a vintage Cartier watch. When I walked into the living room, Mark stopped checking his phone. "Wow," he breathed. "Okay. That works. You look expensive. Shall we?" I asked. The gala was held in the grand ballroom of the Intercontinental. Chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling, casting a golden glow over 300 people desperate to impress one another. Waiters moved like ghosts through the crowd, offering champagne. I took a glass of sparkling water. I needed a clear head. Mark was in his element. He steered me through the room with a hand on the small of my back, his grip tight, possessive. He wasn't holding me, he was driving me. "There's Reynolds," Mark whispered, his body tense. "Stay close. Smile." Director Reynolds was a large man with a red face and a laugh that sounded like a car engine turning over. He was surrounded by a sycophantic circle of junior executives. Mark pushed his way into the circle. "Director. Good to see you." Reynolds turned, blinking. "Ah, Mark. Good to see you. Numbers looked decent this week. Ruthless on the vendor contracts. I like it." "We do what we must," Mark said, puffing out his chest. "Efficiency is key." Reynolds' eyes drifted to me. He looked me up and down, not with desire, but with appraisal. Like he was checking the brand on a handbag. "And who is this?" Reynolds asked. "This is Elena," Mark said quickly. "Pleasure," Reynolds said. "And what do you do, Elena? You in the game?" The circle went quiet. This was the test. In this world, your job title was your soul. I opened my mouth to speak. I was going to say, "I work in the building." It was the truth. But Mark cut me off. "Elena is taking a sabbatical," Mark said, his voice loud, a little too jovial. "She was in arts. Nonprofit stuff. Very noble, but you know how that is. Low yield. She's just helping out with some temporary projects right now while she figures out her next move. Sort of a drifting phase." He laughed. It was a nervous, chipping sound. The other men in the circle chuckled. It was a sound of solidarity. Women, right? Always drifting. Temporary, Reynolds repeated, losing interest immediately. Must be nice to have that luxury. Meanwhile, the rest of us have to keep the wheels turning. Exactly, Mark said. She's great support, though. Keeps the home fires burning. I felt the heat rise up my neck. Not shame. Anger. Cold, liquid anger. He had reduced me to a decorative accessory. He had erased my labor, my sweat, and my aching back from the mopping. But worse, he had erased my intelligence. Drifting. Arts. I took a sip of my water. The glass was cool against my fingertips. "Actually," I said. The word hung in the air. It was quiet, but it had a frequency that cut through the noise. Mark froze. He looked at me, his eyes widening in warning. "Shut up," his eyes screamed. "Don't embarrass me." "Actually," I continued, my voice level, "I find the concept of temporary fascinating. Especially in logistics. Mark was telling me about the vendor contracts you canceled, Director Reynolds. The cleaning staff, specifically." Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" Mark gripped my arm. Hard. "Elena, don't bore the director with details." "It's not boring," I said, stepping slightly away from Mark's grasp. I was reading the fine print of the termination clause for the cleaning vendor. It seems Kinsley Logistics is liable for a severance payout if the contract is terminated without 30 days' notice. Mark terminated it effective immediately yesterday. The silence in the circle changed texture. It went from social to analytical. That standard boilerplate, Mark scoffed, forcing a smile. She reads a lot. Doesn't always understand the context. The context, I said, locking eyes with Reynolds, is that the severance penalty is 15% of the annual contract value. By firing them early to save 2 weeks of wages, you triggered a penalty that costs the company $40,000 more than if you had just let them finish the month. I paused. That doesn't seem like efficiency to me. It seems like expensive haste. Reynolds wasn't laughing anymore. He was looking at Mark. Mark's face was a mask of panic. She's mistaken. She doesn't have the current figures. Elena, honey, you're confusing the old files with. I'm not confused, I said. I'm very good at math. Reynolds looked at Mark. Is that true? Did we trigger the penalty clause? I would have to check with legal, Mark stammered. But Elena she's just talking. She doesn't work here. She doesn't know the business. He turned to me, his smile gone, replaced by a look of pure, icy venom. Why don't you go get another drink, Elena? Mark said. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a dismissal. The grown-ups need to talk shop. The humiliation was designed to be absolute. He was putting me back in my box. He was signaling to Reynolds that I was unruly, uninformed, and irrelevant, and that he was the strong hand that could control me. I looked at Mark. I saw the sweat beading on his upper lip. I saw the desperation. He had no idea. He had no idea that earlier that afternoon, I had sat in a boardroom 3 blocks away, not as a cleaner, but as the managing partner of Vestra Capital. He had no idea that I had signed the preliminary purchase agreement. He had no idea that the representative from the buying group Reynolds was worried about wasn't coming. She was already here. You're right, I said softly. I should go. I placed my water glass on a passing waiter's tray. I'll see you at home, Mark. I turned and walked away. I felt their eyes on my back. I heard Mark's nervous laughter resuming, heard him murmuring apologies about my confusion. I walked out of the ballroom, through the gilded lobby, and into the cold night air. I pulled my phone from my clutch. I had one message. It was from my legal counsel. Subject, Kinsley acquisition message. The board has accepted the preliminary terms. Closing is scheduled for next Friday. Do you want to proceed with the current management retention plan? I looked at the screen. The rain dotted the glass. I thought about the blues. I thought about the way Mark looked through me when I held a mop. I thought about the temporary label he had slapped on my forehead. I typed a reply. Proceed with the purchase. Hold on the management retention plan. I need to make some adjustments to the personnel list. Specifically regarding the VP candidates. I hit send. The game was over. He just didn't know the score yet. The silence in the car on the way home from the gala was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, like the air in a room where a fire has just consumed all the oxygen. Mark drove with a white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel, his jaw set so hard I could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. The city lights blurred past the window, streaks of neon dissolving in the rain, mirroring the dissolution of his composure. I sat in the passenger seat, my hands folded calmly in my lap. I did not apologize. I did not speak. I simply watched the wipers slice back and forth, a metronome counting down the time left in our relationship. When we finally entered our apartment, the explosion I expected didn't come. Instead, it was a cold, simmering resentment, which is often far more dangerous. Mark tossed his keys onto the console table with a clatter that echoed too loudly in the hallway. He loosened his tie, pulling it from his neck as if it were a noose. You have no idea what you did tonight, he said finally, his voice low, his back turned to me. He walked to the kitchen and poured himself a scotch, not offering me anything. I spoke the truth, I replied, unzipping the side of my dress and stepping out of my heels. The contract penalty exists. Reynolds needed to know. Mark spun around, the glass shaking in his hand. Reynolds didn't need to know anything from you. Who do you think you are? You're not a corporate strategist, Elena. You clean up other people's messes. That's it. You read one paragraph of a document you found in the trash, and suddenly you think you're a CFO? He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. I had to spend 20 minutes doing damage control after you walked away. I had to tell him you were a little tipsy. That you get passionate about things you don't understand. I had to infantilize you just to save my own credibility. And the $40,000? I asked, leaning against the doorframe, watching him unravel. Did you explain that away too? There is no $40,000, he shouted, slamming his hand on the counter. I know the numbers. I am the numbers. You think because you mop the floors you know how the building stands? You're a tourist in my world, Elena. A temporary tourist. Don't ever forget that. He downed the drink and stormed past me into the bedroom, slamming the door. I stood there in the dark living room, the humiliation washing over me not because his words were true, but because he believed them so thoroughly. He didn't see a partner, he saw a prop that had malfunctioned. I walked over to the kitchen island where he had left his laptop bag. It was unzipped. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what was on his hard drive because my forensic accountants had been mirroring the company's server activity for weeks. A tourist, I whispered to the empty room. I went to the guest room that night. I didn't sleep. I spent the hours between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. on my secure tablet, reviewing the acquisition strategy. The Kinsley board was desperate. Their stock was overvalued, their operational costs were bloated, and their middle management, people like Mark, were cutting corners that would eventually cause the infrastructure to collapse. I highlighted Mark's name on the personnel file. Status, under review. I deleted under review. I typed, terminal. Then I hesitated. No. Not yet. I needed him to hang himself completely. I needed the fall to be absolute. I backspaced and left it as it was. The next day, the reality of Mark's efficiency hit the 14th floor. I clocked in at 6 p.m. The atmosphere in the janitorial locker room was grim. Usually, there was chatter, gossip about which executive was sleeping with their assistant, complaints about the coffee stains in the break room. Tonight, it was silent. Mrs. Higgins, a 60-year-old woman who had cleaned this building since the 90s, was sitting on the bench, looking pale. What's wrong? I asked, buttoning my blue tunic. They fired the night crew for floors 15 through 20, she said, her voice trembling. Effective immediately. They said it's a cost-saving measure. They want us, the three of us left, to cover those floors tonight. No extra pay. Just absorb duties. I felt the cold anger spark in my chest again. This was Mark. This was the penalty avoidance. He had fired the external contractor, realized the cost, and was now trying to squeeze the remaining internal staff to death to cover the gap before the quarterly report. That's double the workload, I said. It's physically impossible to do that standard of work in an 8-hour shift. If we don't finish, we get written up, Mrs. Higgins said, wiping her eyes. I need this job, Elena. My husband's insulin. I can't lose the insurance. I put a hand on her shoulder. We'll get it done. Don't worry. I grabbed my cart and headed for the elevators. My blood was boiling. Mark was destroying livelihoods to buy himself a slightly better title. He was trading Mrs. Higgins' health for a percentage point on a spreadsheet. As I pushed my cart onto the 14th floor, I saw Mark. He was standing in the hallway with two other junior executives, Jason and Brad. They were laughing. I kept my head down, moving toward the restrooms, but they were blocking the path. So I told Reynolds, look, the overhead is down 12% in 48 hours, Mark was saying, beaming. He loved it. He's talking about fast-tracking the VP announcement before the buyout happens. Dude, you're a legend, Jason said, high-fiving him. Ruthless. I heard you axed the entire vendor contract. What about the mess? What mess? Mark scoffed, gesturing vaguely around him. The place looks fine. The internal staff can handle it. They're used to hard work. It's good for them. Keeps them from getting lazy. He turned and saw me. For a second, there was a flicker of recognition, followed immediately by a mask of indifference. In the office, in the blue uniform, I wasn't the woman he shared a bed with. I was just the help. Excuse me, I said quietly, needing to get past them to the supply closet. Mark didn't move. He just shifted his weight, forcing me to maneuver the heavy cart around his expensive Italian loafers. He didn't look at me. He looked through me. Anyway, Mark continued, as if the cart rattling over the threshold hadn't happened. Friday night is the poker game. My place. You guys in? I'm celebrating early. Definitely, Brad said. Does your girl, does she mind us crashing? Mark laughed. Elena? Nah. She'll be around. She's flexible. Besides, she's not exactly busy with a career right now. She can make sure the beers are cold. I entered the supply closet and let the door click shut behind me. I stood there in the darkness, breathing in the scent of bleach and floor wax. She can make sure the beers are cold. I pulled out my phone. I sent a text to my assistant at Vestra Capital. Get me the full forensic audit of the Kinsley operational budget for the last 12 months. Specifically, look for deferred maintenance and staffing allocation. I want to know exactly how much fake profit Mark is generating by burning out the assets. I put the phone away and grabbed the mop. I had 6 floors to clean. I did it for Mrs. Higgins. But with every stroke of the mop, every trash can I emptied, I was building a case. By Friday, the tension in the apartment was palpable. Mark was manic. The numbers were holding, or so he thought. He was treating me with a strange mix of pity and dismissal. He brought me flowers on Thursday, cheap, supermarket carnations, as if to apologize for the gala, but his words ruined it. I know I was harsh, he said, handing them to me. But I'm under a lot of pressure. When this promotion comes through, things will change. You won't have to do this cleaning thing anymore. I can take care of us. You can take a painting class or something. I put the flowers in a vase. I like my job, Mark. It's honest. He rolled his eyes. It's embarrassing, Elena. But whatever. Just keep it low profile tonight, okay? The guys are coming over. The poker night. The modern tribunal of mediocre men. They arrived at 7 p.m. Mark, Jason, Brad, and a guy named Steve from accounting. They took over the living room, loosening ties, cracking open beers, spreading chips across the mahogany table I had bought. I was in the kitchen, preparing a tray of sandwiches. I had transitioned into the role Mark had scripted for me, the silent, supportive shadow. So, the merger is basically a done deal? Steve asked, shuffling the deck. Who's the buyer? Everyone is speculating. Is it BlackRock? Vanguard? Private equity, Mark said, leaning back with a cigar he hadn't lit yet. Vestra Capital. Some boutique firm. They're aggressive, but they have deep pockets. Rumor is they just want the client list and the logistics software. They'll probably gut the staff, keep the top performers, and flip it in 3 years. And you're safe? Jason asked. Safe? I'm essential, Mark grinned. I'm the one making the balance sheet look sexy for them. Reynolds basically confirmed that if the deal goes through, I'm the point man for the transition. VP of Operations, baby. I walked in with the tray. The conversation didn't stop, but the tone shifted slightly. They looked at me, then at the food, then back at Mark. Thanks, sweetie, Mark said, taking a sandwich without looking up. You can leave that on the side table. Hey Elena, Brad said, his mouth half full. Mark tells us you're working over at the Kinsley building too. That's wild. Do you guys, carpool? The table erupted in laughter. No, Mark said, his smile tight. Different schedules. Elena works the night shift. Must be spooky, Steve said. Ghost hunting in the boardroom. Someone has to clean up the mess you guys make during the day, I said. My voice was light, pleasant, but it cut through the laughter. Mark shot me a warning glare. So, Steve continued, ignoring me. I was looking at the Q3 projections. There's a weird variance in the vendor payout column. It looks like we're under-accruing for liabilities. If those contracts have penalty clauses, they aren't showing up on the books yet. My ears pricked up. Steve was smarter than he looked. Mark waved his hand dismissively. That's just timing, Steve. Accrual accounting. We recognize the liability when the invoice hits. Standard practice. Actually, I said. I hadn't left the room. I was standing by the bookshelf, straightening a row of novels. The room went silent. Mark froze. Actually, I continued, turning to face them. Under GAAP principles, specifically ASC 450, a liability must be accrued if it is probable and estimable. A contract termination penalty is both. If you don't accrue it in the period the decision was made, you're artificially inflating the EBITDA. That's not standard practice, Mark. That's fraud. The silence that followed was absolute. The only sound was the clicking of poker chips as Brad dropped a stack nervously. Steve looked at me, his eyes wide. Then he looked at Mark. She knows ASC 450. Mark's face turned a violent shade of red. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. She watches a lot of crime dramas, Mark stammered, his laugh sounding like a bark. She picks up the lingo. She has no idea what she's talking about. Elena, seriously? You're going to lecture the head of accounting on GAAP? I'm just saying, I said, my pulse steady. Vestra Capital is known for their due diligence. If they find unrecorded liabilities during the closing audit, they won't just lower the offer price. They'll fire the CFO. And the operations manager who authorized the cuts. Mark walked over to me. He was close enough that I could smell the stale beer on his breath. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep. It wasn't violent enough to bruise, but it was a clear physical command, stop. Go to bed, Elena, he hissed, his voice dropping so the others couldn't hear the venom. You are embarrassing yourself. You are embarrassing me. You are a cleaner. Stop pretending you understand how the world works. I looked down at his hand on my arm. Then I looked up into his eyes. I understand more than you think, Mark, I said softly. I pulled my arm away. I walked out of the room, leaving them in a silence that was no longer comfortable. It was the silence of doubt. I went to the bedroom and locked the door. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my laptop. I had the email ready. It was addressed to the due diligence team at Vestra. Subject, urgent audit request, Kinsley Logistics flagged the Q3 vendor liability accruals. Specifically cross-reference the termination date of the cleaning vendor, Clean Corp, with the expense ledger. There is a missing $40,000 accrual. Also, investigate the operations manager bonus structure. It appears tied to EBITDA targets that are being met through fraudulent deferrals. I hesitated. This was the nuclear option. This wouldn't just ruin his promotion, it would likely get him fired for cause. It would destroy his reputation in the industry. I heard laughter erupt from the living room again. Mark had managed to talk them down. He was probably making a joke about me right now. Calling me cute, but confused. Minimizing my existence to elevate his own. I thought about Mrs. Higgins scrubbing the 15th floor with an aching back because Mark wanted to look lean. I hit send. The next morning, the dynamic in the house had shifted, though Mark didn't realize it yet. He woke up hungover and confident. I woke up ready for war. Great night, he mumbled, pouring coffee. Boys think you're eccentric. But I smoothed it over. That was kind of you, I said, reading the newspaper. Hey, he said, checking his phone. Big meeting on Monday. The Vestra reps are finally coming in to sign the transition documents. Reynolds wants everyone in the main boardroom at 9 a.m. Sharp. He looked at me. You're working Monday morning, right? The day shift? Yes, I said. I'll be there. Good, he said. Just stay on the lower floors, okay? Or the basement. I don't want you running into the investors with your mop bucket while I'm trying to close the biggest deal of my life. It sends the wrong message. I'll be exactly where I need to be, Mark. Great. He kissed the top of my head. You're a good girl, Elena. Even if you are a bit intense sometimes. He left for the gym. I sat there for a moment, listening to the door latch click. I picked up my phone and dialed my lawyer. Sarah? It's Elena. Prepare the final purchase agreement. And add a clause to the agenda for the Monday morning meeting. What clause? Sarah asked. Introduction of new ownership, I said. And I want the personnel restructuring announcements to happen live. In the room. Are you sure? I'm sure, I said. I want to look him in the eye when he realizes that the temporary help just bought his permanent record. I hung up. The weekend passed in a blur. Mark spent it buying a new suit and practicing his acceptance speech in the mirror. He was so sure of his ascent. He didn't notice that I was packing boxes. Not his, mine. I was moving out. But not before I cleaned house one last time. Sunday night, as I laid out my work clothes for the next morning, Mark chuckled. Back to the grind tomorrow, huh? He said, watching me fold the blue tunic. Yes, I said. Big day. For me, yeah, he grinned. For you, well, try not to miss a spot. I smiled. A genuine, terrifying smile. Don't worry, Mark, I said. I never miss a spot. Monday morning arrived with the color of bruised steel. The sky outside our apartment window was a flat, oppressive gray, matching the tension that had settled inside the walls. Mark was a study in manic decomposition. He had been up since 4 a.m., pacing the hardwood floors, rehearsing his pitch to the mirror, his voice fluctuating between aggressive confidence and trembling anxiety. He was trying to memorize the fabricated narrative of Kinsley Logistics' success, stitching together a reality that didn't exist. I lay in bed for a moment, watching him. He was wearing his new navy suit, the one he had bought specifically for this meeting. It was expensive, Italian wool, but it hung on him slightly awkwardly, as if the suit itself was rejecting the man inside it. Elena, he called out from the living room, his voice tight. Where is my lucky tie? The red one? I got up, wrapping my silk robe around me. I walked into the living room. The tie was draped over the back of the chair he was standing next to. He was too blind with panic to see it. It's right there, Mark, I said, pointing. He grabbed it, his hands shaking slightly as he tried to knot it. I can't, my fingers are stiff. Do it for me? Please. I need to look perfect. The Vestra people are sharks. If they smell blood, I'm dead. I walked over to him. I took the red silk in my hands. It was cool to the touch. I looped it around his neck. For a moment, I looked at his throat. I saw the pulse fluttering beneath the skin, rapid and frantic. He was terrified. Not because he cared about the company, but because he cared about Mark. He was terrified of being exposed as ordinary. I tied a Windsor knot. Perfect. Symmetrical. Tight. There, I said, smoothing the collar. Thanks, he exhaled, checking himself in the mirror. You're a lifesaver. Seriously. When I'm VP, I'm going to buy you a car. A little hatchback or something. So you don't have to take the bus to your shift. That won't be necessary, I said. Don't be proud, Elena. It's okay to accept help. He checked his watch. Shit. I have to go. Reynolds wants a pre-game huddle at 7:30. You're coming in later for the day shift, right? Yes. I have an appointment at the building at 9 o'clock. He frowned, distracted. Appointment? With who? HR? Something like that. Okay, well, just keep out of sight, all right? The boardroom is on the 20th floor today. Just stay in the basement or the lower levels. I don't want any distractions. He grabbed his briefcase. He didn't kiss me goodbye. He just rushed out the door, the heavy thud of the lock engaging behind him signaling the end of an era, though he didn't know it. I stood in the silence of the apartment. Then, I went to work. I didn't put on my blue tunic. I didn't pack my comfortable shoes. I walked to the back of the closet, past the sensible clothes Mark liked to see me in, to the garment bag I had brought from my storage unit 2 days ago. I unzipped it. Inside was a bespoke charcoal suit from Savile Row, sharp enough to cut glass. A white silk blouse. 4-inch stiletto heels that clicked with the authority of a gavel. I dressed slowly, deliberately. I applied my makeup, not the soft, natural look Mark preferred, but the sharp, defined look of a woman who signs checks with 6 zeros. I pulled my hair back into a severe, elegant chignon. I looked in the mirror. Elena the cleaner was gone. Elena the managing partner of Vestra Capital had returned. I picked up my phone and dialed my driver. I'm ready, James. Pick me up in 5 minutes. The Kinsley building looked different when you approached it in the back of a black S-Class Mercedes. Usually, I entered through the service loading dock, swiping a battered plastic card that only worked on the freight elevator. Today, James pulled up to the main glass revolving doors. The doorman, a kind man named Samuel who had often shared his thermos of coffee with me on cold nights when I was taking out the trash, stepped forward to open the car door. He paused when he saw me. He blinked, confused. He recognized the face, but the context was shattering his brain. "Elena," he whispered, his hand on the door handle. I stepped out, the heels clicking on the pavement. I smiled at him warmly. "Good morning, Samuel. How is your granddaughter?" She's good, ma'am." "But, he looked at my suit, then at the car. "I have a meeting upstairs, Samuel," I said softly. "It's a big day." "Yes, ma'am," he stammered, straightening up and holding the door open with a newfound, rigid respect. "Good luck." I walked into the lobby. The marble floors I had mopped 3 nights ago gleamed under the chandeliers. I knew every scuff mark on them. I knew which tiles were loose. I owned them now. I didn't go to the janitor's closet. I walked straight to the reception desk. The receptionist, a young woman named Chloe who usually ignored me completely, looked up. Her eyes widened. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice wavering. She sensed money. "I'm here for the 9 a.m. acquisition meeting," I said. "My team is already upstairs." "Oh. You must be from Vestra," she said, scrambling to find a visitor badge. "Name?" "Elena Vance." She typed it in, then stopped. She looked at the screen. Her face went pale. "Ms. Vance," she breathed. I have you listed as the owner? I mean, the principal investor?" "That's correct." "I'm so sorry, Mr. Reynolds didn't say you were coming personally." "He said a representative." "Mr. Reynolds doesn't know," I said, leaning in slightly. "And you aren't going to call up and tell him? Are you, Chloe?" She swallowed hard and shook her head. "No, ma'am." "Good. Give me the access card for the private elevator." She handed it to me with trembling fingers. The 20th floor was the executive sanctuary. It smelled of leather, mahogany, and fear. I didn't go into the boardroom immediately. I went to the adjacent observation room. It was a small waiting area separated from the main conference room by a wall of smart glass. Currently, the glass was opaque, but the audio feed was live. My legal team, Sarah, my lead counsel, and David, my forensic accountant, were already inside the boardroom. I could hear their voices through the speaker system. They were playing their parts perfectly, quiet, diligent, intimidating. And I could hear Mark. "So as you can see from the revised EBITDA," Mark was saying, his voice booming with forced charisma, "we've successfully trimmed the fat. Operational costs are down 15% quarter over quarter. We've streamlined the vendor relationships and optimized the internal workforce." "Optimized," David's voice cut in. It was dry, skeptical. "That's an interesting word, Mr. Kinsley. Does optimized include the termination of the cleaning contract with Clean Corp?" I watched the audio visualizer spike. Mark was getting defensive. "Absolutely," Mark said. "That was a redundant expense. We found that the internal staff could absorb the workload with zero loss in quality. It's a testament to my management style. We do more with less." "We noticed," Sarah said. "We also noticed that you haven't accrued the termination penalty for that contract. $40,000. Where is that on the balance sheet?" There was a pause. I could imagine the sweat beading on Mark's forehead. That's a clerical oversight," Mark lied smoothly. "It's being contested. Legal is handling it. We don't accrue contested liabilities. It's basic accounting." "Is it?" David asked. "Because we have an email here from the cleaning vendor stating they accepted the termination and billed you immediately. There is no contest. Just a bill you hid in the drawer." "Look," Mark snapped, his tone turning aggressive. "Are we here to argue about nickels and dimes? Or are we here to discuss the multi-million-dollar acquisition of a premier logistics firm? I am offering you a lean, mean machine. I have cut the dead weight. I have made this company profitable. You should be thanking me, not auditing my trash cans." "We are very interested in your trash cans, Mark," Sarah said calmly. Because that's where you seem to put your liabilities. I checked my watch. 9:15 a.m. It was time. I adjusted my blazer. I tapped the control panel on the wall. Click. The opaque glass wall separating the observation room from the boardroom turned instantly transparent. I wasn't in the room with them, but I was suddenly visible to everyone at the head of the table. Mark was standing at the whiteboard, a marker in his hand. He froze. He looked at the glass. He saw a woman in a charcoal suit, arms crossed, staring at him with the cold detachment of an executioner. He squinted. The lighting was different. The hair was different. The clothes were power. He didn't recognize me. Not instantly. His brain couldn't bridge the gap between Elena the cleaner and the woman in the glass. I pressed the button for the automatic door. It slid open with a soft hiss. I walked into the boardroom. The air in the room changed. It became vacuum-sealed. Reynolds, the director, stood up immediately. He knew how to smell power. He didn't know who I was, but he knew I was the most important person in the room. MS. Reynolds started, extending a hand uncertainly. I ignored him. I walked past him, past the long mahogany table lined with nervous executives. I walked straight to the head of the table, where Sarah and David were sitting. They both stood up immediately. "Good morning, Ms. Vance," Sarah said, deferring to me. "Good morning, Sarah." "David," I nodded to them. I turned to face the room. Mark was staring at me. His mouth was slightly open. The marker fell from his hand and clattered onto the floor. The sound was incredibly loud in the silence. "Elena," he whispered. It wasn't a question. It was a plea for reality to reset itself. "Excuse me?" Reynolds looked from Mark to me. "You know this, wait. Elena? The woman from the gala? The temporary help?" Mark laughed. It was a frantic, terrifying sound. "Elena, what are you doing here? How did you get in? Did you bring coffee? Is this a joke?" He looked around the room, desperate for an ally. "Guys, this is my girlfriend. She's having a bit of a breakdown. She works here. On the night shift. She must have gotten confused about the time." He started walking toward me, his face twisting into a mask of angry embarrassment. "Elena, you need to leave. Now. You are humiliating yourself. I told you to stay in the basement." He reached out to grab my arm, just like he had at the poker night. "Don't," I said. I didn't shout. I didn't raise my voice. I simply projected the command with the weight of 51% controlling interest. Mark stopped, his hand hovering in the air. "Sit down, Mark," I said. "What?" He blinked. "You can't tell me what to do. I'm the VP of operations. You're the..." I said, "Sit down." I walked over to the empty chair at the head of the table, the seat reserved for the buyer. I sat down. I placed my phone on the table. "My name is Elena Vance," I addressed the room, my voice clear and steady. "I am the managing partner of Vestra Capital. I am the one buying this company." I looked at Reynolds. His face had gone the color of ash. Then I looked at Mark. "And I am not temporary." The silence that followed was total. It was the silence of a worldview shattering. Mark staggered back, his legs hitting the edge of a chair. He collapsed into it, not because he was obeying me, but because his knees had given out. "No," he mumbled. "No, that's impossible. You scrub floors. I've seen you. I live with you. You take the bus." "I take the bus because it helps me see things you miss from your BMW, Mark," I said. "I scrub floors because it's the only way to know if a company is rotting from the foundation up." I opened the folder David had placed in front of me. "We are here to discuss the acquisition," I said, flipping a page. "But first, we are going to discuss the personnel list. Specifically, the role of the Vice President of Operations." I looked up at Mark. His eyes were wide, wet, and terrified. "It appears," I said, "that the current candidate for the role has been falsifying financial records, violating labor contracts, and creating a culture of disrespect that is incompatible with Vestra Capital's values." "Elena, please," Mark croaked. "Babe. Let's talk about this. At home. Please. We are not at home, Mr. Kinsley, I said coldly. We are in my boardroom. And in my boardroom, we rely on facts. I turned to David. Show them the audit. David connected his laptop to the main screen. The graph Mark had been so proud of, the one showing his efficiency, disappeared. In its place appeared a new spreadsheet. It was titled, Unrecorded Liabilities and Fraudulent ACCRUALS. And right at the top, highlighted in red, was Mark's name. The room watched the screen. I watched Mark. He wasn't looking at the data. He was looking at me. He was looking at the woman he had silenced, the woman he had minimized, the woman he had treated as a prop in his life. And he was realizing, finally, that he had never really seen me at all. The projector fan hummed. It was a low, monotonous drone that seemed to underscore the absolute stillness of the boardroom. On the screen, the spreadsheet glowed with damning clarity, the red cells marking Mark's efficiencies as what they truly were, liabilities. Mark stared at the screen, then at me. His face was a landscape of collapsing certainties. He looked like a man who had reached for a stair railing and found only air. This is... Mark started, his voice cracking. He cleared his throat, trying to summon the bravado that had carried him through his career. This is a misunderstanding. A data error. We can explain this. Reynolds, tell her. Tell her about the transition plan. He turned to Reynolds, the director, his eyes pleading for backup. He expected the boys' club to close ranks. He expected the solidarity of the suits to protect him from the intruder. But Reynolds was not looking at Mark. Reynolds was looking at me. He was looking at the cut of my blazer, the calmness of my hands resting on the table, and most importantly, the 51% ownership stake I now represented. Reynolds shifted in his chair, physically angling his body away from Mark. It was a subtle movement, but in the corporate world, it was a death sentence. Ms. Vance, Reynolds said, his voice smooth and devoid of any previous warmth he had shown Mark. I want to be clear. The board was not aware of these discrepancies. Mark presented the vendor termination as a mutual agreement. If there is a penalty clause that was hidden, that is a violation of our disclosure policy. Mark's jaw dropped. What? Reynolds, you knew. We talked about it over scotch. I told you I was going to crush the overhead. You laughed. You said, do it. I authorized cost-saving measures, Reynolds said coldly. I did not authorize fraud. And I certainly did not authorize the concealment of liabilities from a potential buyer. The speed of the betrayal was breathtaking. It was the law of the jungle, the weak are eaten to feed the strong. Mark had just become the meal. Fraud? Mark sputtered. He slammed his hand on the table. I am the best thing that happened to this department. I increased margins by 12%. You didn't increase margins, Mark, I said. My voice was quiet, but it stopped him instantly. You borrowed from the future to pay for your reputation today. And now, the bill is due. I tapped the table, signaling David. Next slide, please. The screen changed. It wasn't a spreadsheet this time. It was a transcript of an email. From M. Kinsley to HR Director Subject, Night Shift Reduction Body, cut the headcount on floors 15 to 20. Squeeze the remaining staff. They won't complain. They need the checks too bad. If they miss targets, write them up. We need the labor variance to look positive for the Vestra audit. The room went deadly silent. I looked at Mark. Squeeze the remaining staff. They won't complain. Mark turned pale. That was internal strategy. It's out of context. The context, I said, is that I was one of the people you were squeezing. I was on the 14th floor when you sent that email. I saw Mrs. Higgins crying in the locker room because she didn't know how she would finish her shift without injuring herself. I saw the fear you created. I leaned forward. You thought you were breaking infrastructure. You thought you were pushing numbers on a page. But you were breaking people. And the problem with breaking people, Mark, is that eventually, you break the wrong one. Mark looked around the room. The other executives were staring at their notepads, refusing to meet his eyes. He was drowning, and they were all pretending to be fascinated by the grain of the wood table. Elena, Mark said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Don't do this. Not here. Not in front of them. We're a team. I'm your boyfriend. Doesn't that mean anything? He tried to play the intimacy card. He tried to use the relationship he had hidden to save the career he had flaunted. It means I know you better than anyone else in this room, I replied. It means I know that you practice your speeches in the mirror to hide your insecurity. It means I know you lie about small things, like the price of your watch, so I know you lie about big things, like the solvency of this department. I paused. And it means I know that you introduced me to these very people as temporary. I gestured to the room. You told them I was drifting. That I was a consultant. That I was helping out. You were ashamed of the reality. Mark flinched. Well, I continued, here is the reality. I am not temporary. I am the owner. And based on this audit, there is only one person in this room whose position is temporary. Mark stood up. His chair toppled over backward with a loud crash. You can't fire me, he shouted. The veneer of the executive finally cracked, revealing the frightened child beneath. I built this. I am the VP of operations. Actually, Reynolds interrupted, seizing the moment to curry favor with me. You aren't. The promotion was contingent on the successful closing of the Vestra deal. And since Ms. Vance has highlighted gross negligence in your performance, that promotion is rescinded. Reynolds looked at me for approval. I gave a slight nod. Furthermore, Reynolds continued, emboldened, given the evidence of financial misrepresentation, specifically the intentional hiding of the Clean Corp penalty, we have cause for immediate termination. Your employment with Kinsley Logistics ends now. Mark looked as if he had been slapped. He looked at Reynolds, then at me. You planned this, he hissed at me. You set me up. You waited. You let me walk into this. I didn't set you up, Mark, I said calmly. I simply turned on the lights. You were the one standing in the mess you made. I'm not leaving, Mark said, crossing his arms. I want a lawyer. I want a severance package. I know where the bodies are buried. We know where they are too, David, my accountant, spoke up. We found them on your hard drive. Along with the browser history searching for non-extradition countries and how to hide assets in crypto. We have enough for a criminal referral, Mr. Kinsley. If I were you, I wouldn't be asking for severance. I would be asking for us not to call the SEC. Mark froze. The fight went out of him like air leaving a balloon. He slumped. Elena. He whispered. Please. I have the lease on the car. The apartment. I can't lose this. I looked at him. Really looked at him. For months, I had waited for this moment. I thought I would feel triumph. I thought I would feel a surge of vindictive joy. But I didn't. I felt a cold, hollow pity. He was small. He was a man who had built his entire identity on a business card, and without it, he was nothing. You didn't worry about Mrs. Higgins' rent when you fired her team, I said softly. You didn't worry about the receptionists when you cut their benefits. You called it efficiency. I closed the folder in front of me. This is just efficiency, Mark. You are a liability. I am removing you from the books. I pressed the intercom button on the table. Security to the boardroom, please. Mark looked at the door. Panic flared in his eyes. To be escorted out, that was the ultimate shame. That was the walk of death. No, he said, grabbing his briefcase. No security. I'll walk out. I'll go. Leave your badge, Reynolds barked. And your company phone. And the laptop. Mark hesitated. Then, with trembling hands, he emptied his pockets. He placed the phone on the mahogany table. He unclipped his ID badge, the one that said Senior Manager, and laid it down. He looked at me one last time. There was no love in his eyes. There was only shock and the bitter realization that he had underestimated the one person he should have feared. I thought you were. He started, but he couldn't finish the sentence. You thought I was nothing, I finished for him. You were wrong. The door opened. 2 security guards stepped in. One of them was Samuel from the lobby, the man I had asked to be assigned to this floor. Samuel looked at Mark, then at me. He saw the situation instantly. Mr. Kinsley, Samuel said, his voice firm but polite. If you would come with us. Mark looked at Samuel, a man he had walked past 1,000 times without a nod. Now, Samuel was the authority. Mark lowered his head. He walked past the table of silent executives. He walked past Reynolds, who was already typing on his phone, likely looking for Mark's replacement. He walked past me. He didn't look down. The door closed behind him. The silence returned to the room. But it wasn't tense anymore. It was the silence of a storm having passed. I took a sip of water. My hand was perfectly steady. Now, I said, turning back to the room as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Let's discuss the retention strategy for the actual talent in this company. I want to review the compensation packages for the support staff. We're going to implement a raise for the night shift, effective immediately. The executives nodded furiously, scribbling in their notebooks. Yes, Ms. Vance. Great idea, Ms. Vance. Of course, Ms. Vance. They were terrified. They knew that the woman at the head of the table saw everything. They knew that the invisible staff were her eyes and ears. I looked at the empty chair where Mark had sat. He was gone. His career was ash. His reputation was destroyed. And I hadn't raised my voice once. The meeting continued for another 2 hours. We dissected the budget. I reinstated the vendor contract with Clean Corp, with a penalty clause that favored them, not us. I fired the HR director who had approved Mark's bullying tactics. By the time we finished, it was noon. Excellent meeting, Reynolds said, standing up and offering a sweaty hand. I hope we can move past the unpleasantness with Mr. Kinsley. I assure you, under my leadership. Director Reynolds, I said, ignoring his hand. You are on probation. You have 90 days to turn the culture of this place around. If I hear one report of staff mistreatment, from the VPs down to the janitors, you will follow Mark out that door. Do we understand each other? Reynolds gulped. Crystal clear, Ms. Vance. Good. I stood up. Meeting adjourned. I walked out of the boardroom. Chloe, the receptionist, was standing at her desk, looking wide-eyed. Ms. Vance, she whispered. Is it true? Did Mr. Kinsley get fired? Yes, Chloe, I said. She hesitated, then a small, genuine smile touched her lips. He yelled at me once because his coffee wasn't hot enough. He told me I was replaceable. He was projecting, I said. You're doing a great job, Chloe. I walked to the elevator. I didn't press the button for the lobby. I pressed the button for the basement. I needed to do one last thing before I left. The elevator descended, leaving the world of polished wood and expensive suits, down into the concrete belly of the building. The air grew cooler, smelling of cleaning chemicals and damp earth. I walked into the break room. It was empty, except for Mrs. Higgins, who was eating a sandwich wrapped in foil. She looked up, startled by the sight of a woman in a bespoke suit standing in the doorway. She didn't recognize me at first. Can I help you, ma'am? The offices are upstairs. Hello, Martha, I said, using her first name. She squinted, tilting her head. Then, her hands flew to her mouth. Elena? My God, look at you. You look like a movie star. I walked over and sat on the wobbly plastic bench next to her. It was a stark contrast to the boardroom chair, but it felt more real. I have some news, Martha, I said. The new ownership, they've decided to cancel the shift changes. The night crew is being rehired. And everyone is getting a 15% raise. Martha dropped her sandwich. Tears welled up in her eyes instantly. Oh, thank God. Thank God. Are you sure? That Mr. Kinsley, he said. Mr. Kinsley doesn't work here anymore, I said softly. Martha looked at me, studying my face, my clothes, the way I held myself. She was a wise woman. She had seen everything from the bottom up for 30 years. It was you, wasn't it? She whispered. You fixed it. I just cleaned up a mess, Martha, I said. That's what we do. She reached out and took my hand. Her hand was rough, calloused from years of labor. My hand was smooth, manicured. But the grip was the same. Thank you, she said. No, I said. Thank you. You taught me more about this building in 3 months than the board knew in 10 years. I stood up. I have to go. But I'll be seeing you around. The owners are going to be very hands-on. I walked back to the elevator. I took out my phone. I had 5 missed calls from Mark. And 3 texts. Elena, please pick up. I'm sorry. We need to talk about the lease. I didn't reply. I simply blocked the number. The elevator took me up to the lobby. Samuel was there. He gave me a sharp nod. Everything handled, Miss Vance? Everything is handled, Samuel. I walked out into the cool afternoon air. James was waiting with the car door open. Where to, Miss Vance? Home, James, I said. I have some packing to finish. I got into the car. As we pulled away, I looked back at the Kinsley building. It was just glass and steel. It was just an asset. But the rot was gone. I leaned back in the leather seat. I was tired. But it was a good tired. It was the exhaustion of a job well done. However, I knew it wasn't quite over. Mark was desperate. And desperate men are unpredictable. I had taken his job, his reputation, and his future. He would be waiting at the apartment. I checked the time. It was 1 p.m. I told James to drive slower. I wanted Mark to sit in the silence of that apartment for a little longer. I wanted him to look at the empty boxes and the half-packed life we had shared. I wanted him to understand that silence isn't empty. It's full of answers. And I was about to give him the final one that the key felt heavy in my hand, a cold piece of brass that unlocked a life I no longer inhabited. I stood outside the door of our apartment, his apartment, officially, though I had paid the deposit, and listened. There was no sound from inside. No TV, no music, no pacing footsteps. Just the humming silence of a building in the middle of a workday. I unlocked the door and pushed it open. The afternoon light was filtering through the sheer curtains, casting long, pale rectangles on the floor. The apartment looked like a crime scene where the victim was dignity. Mark was sitting on the beige sofa, still wearing his suit trousers and the white dress shirt, though the tie was gone and the top 3 buttons were undone. He was staring at the blank television screen. A half-empty bottle of scotch sat on the coffee table, next to the company phone he had been forced to surrender, which he had evidently managed to bring home before realizing it was just a brick of plastic now. He didn't turn when I entered. He just slumped further into the cushions. You took your time, he said, his voice raspy. He didn't sound angry anymore. He sounded hollowed out. I closed the door behind me and set my purse on the console table. I kept my distance. I wasn't here to comfort him. I was here to close the file. I had to ensure the transition was smooth, I said calmly. There were personnel files to update. He let out a short, bitter laugh and finally looked at me. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face slack with shock. Personnel files, he repeated. That's what I am to you now? A file you moved to the trash bin? You moved yourself there, Mark, I said, walking over to the window. I looked out at the city skyline, the steel and glass towers where thousands of people played the same games of status and power. I just signed the paperwork. He shook his head, rubbing his face with his hands. I don't get it. I don't get it. You played me. 4 months. You came home, put on those cheap clothes, scrubbed your hands, why? To make a fool of me? Was it some kind of sick test? It wasn't a test, Mark. At least, not at first. I turned to face him. I needed him to understand this. Not for his sake, but for mine. I needed to articulate the reality of what had happened so I could leave it behind. When I started the due diligence on Kinsley Logistics, I explained, my voice steady, I wanted to see the company from the ground up. I told you I was taking a break from finance to do something grounded. That was true. I took the cleaning job to understand the culture. I wanted to know if the company was worth buying. You could have told me, he said, his voice rising slightly. I was the manager. I could have helped you. We could have fixed it together. We could be running that place side by side right now. I looked at him with genuine pity. He still didn't understand. I didn't tell you because I wanted to see who you were when you thought no one important was watching, I said. And I saw. I was stressed, he pleaded, leaning forward. The pressure, Elena. You don't know what it's like. I do know, I cut in. I run a private equity firm managing $500 million in assets. I know stress. But stress reveals character, Mark. It doesn't alter it. I took a step closer. You were ashamed of me. From the moment I put on that uniform, I ceased to be your partner. I became a liability. You introduced me as temporary. You silenced me at parties. You minimized my existence to elevate your own status. He flinched, looking away. I was trying to protect our image. I wanted us to look successful. No, I corrected. You wanted you to look successful. You treated me like an accessory that didn't match your suit. I paused, letting the silence stretch. And then there was the fraud, I added softly. That wasn't stress. That was greed. You hurt people, Mark. Real people. You fired Mrs. Higgins' team to pad your bonus. You risked the company's future to hide your mistakes. That isn't a partner. That is a liability. He stood up then, swaying slightly. The alcohol had made him brave, or perhaps just desperate. So that's it, he asked. You just destroy my life and walk away? I have nothing, Elena. They took my laptop. They took my reputation. Reynolds is going to blackball me in the industry. What am I supposed to do? You have your severance, I said. Whatever is legally required by the state. And you have your skills. If you are as good as you told everyone you were, you'll find a job. A job? He laughed, a high, cracking sound. Who hires a VP who got escorted out by security for fraud? Maybe you shouldn't look for a VP role, I suggested coolly. Maybe you should try starting from the bottom. It provides a lot of perspective. I hear the night shift is hiring. His face went purple. For a second, I thought he might throw the glass. But he didn't. He didn't have the fight in him. He sank back onto the couch, putting his head in his hands. Why didn't you just tell me, he whispered. It was the question of a child who has been punished and truly doesn't understand the crime. If you had just told me you were rich, if you had just told me you were the buyer, I would have treated you like a queen. And there it was. The final confirmation. I know, I said. The words hung in the air, heavier than any accusation. That is exactly the problem, Mark. You would have respected the money. You would have respected the title. But you didn't respect me. I walked over to the table where I had left the box of my things I had packed earlier. It was small. Just a few books, some personal documents, and the framed photo of my parents. I didn't want anything else from this life. I paid the rent through the end of the month, I said. You have 2 weeks to figure out your next move. The lease is in your name, but I've informed the landlord I'm off the guarantee. Elena. The car is a corporate lease, I continued, listing the facts like items on a balance sheet. Since you are no longer an employee of Kinsley Logistics, the car will be repossessed in 48 hours. I suggest you clean it out. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face now. It was a pathetic sight, but it didn't move me. It was the tears of a man mourning his lifestyle, not his relationship. You can't leave me like this, he sobbed. I love you. I stopped at the door. I looked back at him one last time. I remembered the man I thought I had met a year ago, ambitious, charming, driven. I realized now that those were just costumes he wore. The real man was the one who mocked the janitor. The real man was the one who cheated the ledger. You don't love me, Mark, I said. You don't even know me. You never asked. I opened the door. Goodbye. I closed the door on his sobbing. The click of the latch was the most satisfying sound I had heard in months. I walked out of the building and into the late afternoon sun. The rain from earlier in the week had cleared, and the air smelled fresh, washed clean. James was waiting by the curb. He opened the rear door of the car. Where to, Miss Vance? He asked. To the hotel? I paused, looking at the city. I felt lighter. The weight of the deception, the weight of the blue uniform, the weight of Mark's judgment, it was all gone. No, James, I said. Take me to the office. Vestra Capital. Very good, ma'am. As the car merged into traffic, I opened my tablet. I had work to do. The acquisition of Kinsley Logistics was just the beginning. The company needed a complete overhaul. I had already drafted the emails. We were going to implement a new profit-sharing model for the employees. We were going to fix the safety protocols. We were going to build a company where the people who cleaned the floors were treated with the same dignity as the people who sat in the boardrooms. I scrolled through the personnel list one last time.